Thanks everyone for sticking around to the last session of the day. I'll try and keep this fairly light. It's not going to get too deep and technical, so you can all go off and enjoy the keynote after this. So originally I had a different title to this. It was going to be how to stop freeloading and start giving back, but I didn't think Daniel would accept that as a title, so I tried to make it a little bit more positive. So this is definitely a carrot rather than the big stick kind of session here. So as Daniel said, I've been working in Drupal for over 10 years, but probably really started contributing a lot in the Drupal 8 release cycle. So before Drupal 8.0 came out, it was the first time I really kind of got involved in Drupal core in a reasonably big way. And I think what I realised is that there's a lot that you benefit out of doing contribution, and I don't think that's widely understood. I think a lot of people are using Drupal on a day-to-day basis, which is great. I'm glad that they are. But I feel like they're missing out by not contributing back, because there's a whole lot more that they could be gaining. So first of all, I wanted to just talk about why I think you should be contributing. So Drupal usage is still growing. It's growing at a slower rate than it was before. This is just built with, so we're still looking at the top 100,000 and top 10,000 sites in the world. But that's the growth graph. You can see that it's leveling out, but there's still definite growth there. And of course, there's the big contributor in Australia, which is GovCMS. So that's meant that there's a whole lot of government sites that are now using Drupal that weren't before. And we've seen a big adoption of Drupal in Australia, especially in government. But unfortunately, the actual contribution space is not keeping pace with this growth in usage. So, we're still seeing sites that are being reported back to Drupal.org topping 1.1 million. And even, this is the GovCMS usage, we're still seeing, more and more sites being launched on Drupal. That's quite a lot of Drupal sites in government. But however, there's only 9 government organisations listed on Drupal.org. So that doesn't mean there's only 9 government organisations contributing, but it's just an indicator, if you like, of the comparison of the number of sites that are using Drupal versus the number of sites that are actually registered that they're an organisation on Drupal.org and are participating in that contribution space. As I said, this isn't the big stick session. It's more trying to focus on the positives. So this is not knocking anybody by any way, but I just wanted to point out there's a disparity there. So this is a phrase that I pulled out of a random conversation on Slack, I think it was, and it was something that was like a trigger for me. It's basically, we're watching the issues. Basically what that means is that we're just waiting for other people to come in and either provide a patch or fix the problem. And it basically made me think of this, right? It's like, let's someone else do it. Oh, we'll just sit here patiently waiting, and we'll make sure that, when it's ready, then we can start using it. But I think, and also basically what it means is that there's more and more burden being put on contributors. So it's more and more people are consuming open source and Drupal, but there's still the same amount of people that are essentially the producers. So what I'm hoping is here today is to trying to convince a few more people to become producers, lessen that burden and benefit from it. Okay, so we do need more contributors. So what I want to sort of focus on now is what would be the hidden benefits of contribution. They're not hidden, but it's something that people might not be acutely aware of. So this is a bit of research that Daniel actually sent me, which is very valuable. But basically, there was this research paper here by Frank Nagel at the Harvard Business School, and he did a study on not Drupal, but open source contribution, and he was talking to large corporate organizations, ones that were using open source on a daily basis, and he found that the companies that are contributing and giving back are the actual ones who become the experts, right? So they're making the most out of it. And there was a number of things that they benefit from. They benefit from their knowledge of the product, but essentially they become more productive using that software. So this is just a general question. If you're writing custom modules or you're doing your own Drupal development, how are you handling these kinds of things in your own organisation? Instead of contributing maybe to a module, you decided, oh, we're just going to write our own custom module. Are you covering all of these in a sufficient way? With often, which is limited teams, you've got a small number of teams, you've got limited resources. How well are you able to keep your custom modules up to date? So you know that, for example, you may know that in Drupal 8 there's a deprecation policy. So new APIs are being introduced, old ones are being deprecated, which means that they're not being removed. They will be removed in Drupal 9, but we're basically saying if you're using this now, it's going to be removed. So be aware, and you should be updating your stuff. If you're writing custom modules, you need to manage that yourself, right? Otherwise, your module's not going to be able to be upgraded. But on the other hand, if you're contributing to Drupal core, all of these things must be, these are the gates that you must go through in order to get any patches accepted. So obviously coding standards are a really simple one, but it's also got to be accessible. You've got to make sure that it's secure, it's fast, it works well and under scale. It's got test coverage for all possible cases. And I think the key one I want to emphasize is that it needs to be peer reviewed. So in the Drupal issue queue, when you post a patch, it's not just, yeah, that's great, let's commit it. There are rules around what the status needs to be. So you need to have at least a couple of people review it. Sometimes someone might say, this needs a framework maintainers review before it can proceed. But essentially, it'll get to the point where it's reviewed and tested by the community. And essentially what that means is that there's been enough people that have looked at it to say, yep, it's ready now for a core committer to review it. In a lot of cases, they'll knock it back. They'll go, oh, you haven't thought of this, you haven't thought of that. So they're like the last step. So you're going through an immense amount of review to be able to get a bit of code into Drupal core that you just don't get if you're building your own custom modules. And this is something that I think is kind of pertinent because the real power of open source is in co-creation. I think what he was trying to say here is that because of that, the process of swarming around an issue and getting multiple people giving feedback and reviews, we're building a better product. Okay, so if you haven't, just as a show of hands, who's contributed patches or done reviews on Drupal.org? Oh, that's a good number. That's about half the room. So for those who haven't, what I wanted to do was just sort of talk. It might be a bit intimidating when you're thinking about how do I contribute. I mean, Drupal core can be complex, and you could be intimidated by thinking, well, I don't really know enough to be able to do something. But I just wanted to kind of talk through a number of different ways that you can contribute. So the first way is volunteering your own time, right? So spending time in there, going through the issue queue yourself. And these are some simple things that you can do that basically move a patch or some issue another step along the sequence of steps that needs to go through in order to be able to get committed. So a really useful thing is updating the issue summary. Now, there's a lot of people who are great developers that aren't necessarily great communicators, but it can be guaranteed when a core committer comes along to review an issue, they're looking at the issue summary and they need to be able to get a good understanding about what that issue is about, what the proposed solution is, and what the changes are going to be before they'll go through and read 100 comments and look at the last patch, right? So something like by just you're volunteering your time to go through, read all the comments and update the summary in a nice succinct way that's very clear to someone to come along and understand it is hugely valuable, and again it moves things along another step. Often it may require some manual testing. Obviously there's lots of automated tests, but sometimes there's manual tests that are required. Even just reviewing a patch. So I know one of the people that works at Previous Next, Gibran, is a great reviewer because he'll spend the time, he'll read through things, he'll ask questions. It's not necessarily all about saying change this, change that. It's about being able to understand the code and why the decisions were made as well. But a review, me personally, whenever I'm working on an issue queue, I'm hunting out there trying to find someone who'll actually review a patch because I need a review to be able to move it forward. And they are often in short supply as well. So just being able to go in there and go, okay, I'm going to start reviewing a couple of issues and post my feedback just moves it ahead. Of course, posting a patch is posting some code. That's part of the process. But you can see it's not the only thing. It's just one step in this whole process. Oh, so I'm not going to update TunnelBlink. Thanks, TunnelBlink. And finally, I think there's a really powerful tool which is just the tags. I mean, the issue queue is there's hundreds of thousands, millions probably of issues in Drupal.org, and being able to navigate and find things can be difficult. But if you can look at an issue and go, okay, well, someone's put a comment saying this needs a re-roll, needs to be re-rolled, just go and tag it needs re-roll because then someone else can find it more easily and do a re-roll. Oh, now I've done my thing, hang on. Okay, so these are some of the tags that I think are really important. So needs tests, so you come along, see someone's posted some code, there's not enough tests, go and write some tests. Increase the test coverage. Needs a re-roll is a really good beginner one if you've never contributed before, because all that means is that the patch no longer applies, and it's often quite easy to go through and just download the patch, try and apply it, see where the conflicts are, and then just resolve them. Often they're like 1 or 2 lines, and it can be a good way just to get into the flow of pulling down a patch, making a change, and posting a patch, just that whole workflow. Manual testing I mentioned before, change records. So again, this is like updating the issue summary, but if there's an API change, you'll basically need to keep a record of those changes in change records, and all you need to do is go and create a new draft change record, describe what the change is, and then link it back to the issue. So it's a good way to move things along. There's a couple here that are also, well, one of them especially is good for beginners, which is quick fix. So, and I haven't included a novice tag as well. So these are just things that people have said, all right, well, someone who is just getting into contributing would find this easy. So rather than somebody who's like a maintainer of a subsystem working on that patch, let someone else have a go. So a quick fix or a novice user tag is one to look for. And then one of my favorites, which is basically trying to remove all of the old Drupal 6 code out of Drupal 8 in order to get it ready for Drupal 9, is this one called kill includes, which is basically old procedural code that can be updated to object-oriented code. Okay. And I think it's also worthwhile talking about, I guess, the mentality of when you're building your own projects, how to what I call push it up the stack, which basically means like instead of writing your own custom module, so what is your custom module trying to do? Is it trying to just work around something that should be in core already? Maybe you should be posting a patch as a core issue, or at least writing a writing an issue or a contrib issue to say, hey, I want to do this, but I can't do it, rather than just writing your own code in isolation and going off and doing your own thing. Maybe it could be a patch on a contrib module or a new contrib module where other people could benefit from your work in order to get that feature in. Yeah, and I mean, this is a quote that I grabbed again from Slack, and while Sam is an amazing contributor and contributes a huge amount of code, this was an example of him just posting an issue on of a feature that that thought would be useful in a module, and he was like, it'd be great if we could do this. He obviously had moved on and didn't need it for some time, but then he was working on a project and he was like, oh, I need that feature, and he went back, and the module maintainer had actually written that code and made it part of the module. But if he hadn't posted an issue back 3 months earlier, he would have had to spend 64 story points worth of time developing that for himself. So again, it's about collaborating and contributing, and it's not all about posting patches necessarily, but about being involved in that community. Of course, there's other ways to volunteer. If you're an organization, so you can sponsor contribution. So if you're working for a government organization or a small company, like even Previous Next, we're contributing we're paying our developers to spend 20% time on contributing to core or contrib modules, and we're quite happy to do that. And I think this is a trend that you'll see not just in Drupal, but in all open source software. So if you look at the Linux Foundation, you look at Kubernetes, which has been in a couple of talks today, a large proportion of the people who are actually contributing code are being paid to do so. So they're being paid by their organization to do so because there's demonstrated benefits in that. So again, going back to Frank Nagel's Harvard Business School research that he'd done, basically he said when these types of assets are central to a company's core business, the company stands to gain competitive edge by allowing employees to contribute them in company time. So basically it's saying you have a competitive edge, you have a improved productivity by allowing your developers to work in company time on open source projects. So as I said, there's ways to sponsor contributions. So one of them could be 20% time. I understand that's not always possible in a lot of organizations, but things like maybe having sprint days, which are paid time, where you send your developers off to work on open source software, and even convincing, if you're say a Drupal agency, convincing your clients to help sponsor contribution. So a lot of the clients we work with will encourage them to say, look, the benefits of open sourcing this, making this module a contrib module, are lowering the risk and the long-term maintenance of this project by having other people use it and improve it and make sure that it remains well maintained. Okay, so summarising some of the benefits, I think, if I haven't kind of convinced you already, so you're improving the knowledge of your developers by contributing to open source. They're learning about, they're posting code that is being reviewed by experts in Drupal essentially, and providing useful feedback that is training them, so that they're learning how to be better developers essentially. There's just a general benefit in participating and collaborating in the community and working with others. And I think this is something that is often, it's fairly well known, but essentially if you're working in open source, a lot of your career development is based on your reputation. So people look at your GitHub profile or your Drupal.org contributions if you're in an interview process, and to be able to build up your own kind of personal reputation is very valuable in your long-term career. And I think also just improving morale and your motivation, I think for a lot of people, the fact that they're building something that millions of people are using out there in the world is enough to motivate them to kind of want to participate and contribute. So there's a lot of altruism there, I think, in giving things back to other people. So just as a little kind of throw in at the end here, so the sprint day is on Wednesday. I hope some of you can make it. It's a good opportunity if you have never contributed before as well, just to come along. There'll be people there that are regular contributors and we'll be able to guide you and help you. It's not a kind of training day or anything like that. It's more come along. We have been tagging issues in the Drupal.org issue queue for the sprint day. So there are things of all kind of levels and all kind of abilities there to be able to kind of jump in and pick something that you might be able to work on. That's a link there to our blog post, which shows you how to prepare for the sprint day or what you might need in order to get set up and understand contribution a little bit better. And that's it. Thank you.
On there and clear out the queue so that hopefully someone else can pick it up. Also had a question around, do you think it's important to build a network of people within the Drupal community to help you review and get stuff through? Like, for example, I've got a core patch that's been sitting there for 4 months or so. It's not a very exciting one, and I've kind of reached out to a couple of people, but do you feel like that is an important aspect to make sure you've got people that you can sort of go, hey, review this, I'll review that,
Yep.
etc.?
So one of the things when I started contributing, 5 years ago or more, I was at a DrupalCon. I went to the sprint day, and I sat down next to Tim Plunkett and Daniel Winner, and I was like, "Hey, what are you working on? Can I help?" And I built up a rapport there. So that's why sprint days are good for building that network, and then you can go back and you be on Slack, and it'll be like, "Hey, it's me, can you have a look at my issue?" and all those kinds of things. If you're not able to do that, then I think, even just being in Slack and saying, "Hey, I'm wanting to get someone to review my patch. How about I trade you? I'll review yours and you review mine," or just posting a question, or it could be trying to looking at the maintainers list, like who maintains that system. They're going to be the most knowledgeable person of that area, and maybe approaching them to say, "Hey, I just want to know if I'm heading in the right direction. Is this something that's worth considering?" Just to trying to get other people involved, or look at the people that are contributing the most to that subsystem or whatever, and then trying to connect with them in Slack. Yeah, but I think just further on that, I know Lee Rollins isn't here today, but he has this philosophy of post a patch and set it free. It's kind of like, I know often you're posting a patch because it's urgent for your project, but if you're just working just on contributions, then often he'll do quite a lot and then just assume that eventually someone will review them. So it's not clinging onto it and checking on it every day and making sure and seeing if someone's doing it, but just like, yep, it's there, and then someone will get around, because people are volunteering their own time as well. So. Yep.
Controversial question a bit. I have myself experienced hardship in contributing for different reasons. Either it's a bad UI in Drupal.org, or very hard to patching comparing to pull requests in GitHub. To your knowledge, is there a project that is looking after improving of the contributing experience?
It depends. There's a couple of things in that. So there's there is a they're rolling out Gitlab. I think it's supposed to be out before Christmas. I don't know. I can't remember what the schedule is, but that's going to be a massive contributor experience, because you'll be familiar, if you're using GitHub, you'd know about pull requests and those kinds of things. It's moving in that direction. I think it's going step by step. slowly, but that's something that has been talked about for years. I was on the Drupal org software working group 4 years ago, and we were talking about GitLab back then.
There was a massive spreadsheet of comparison between
Yeah.
GitLab and
Yeah, and I mean, the Drupal Association is kind of like there's so much responsibility there for those kinds of things, but limited resources, so they do move slowly with that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think the fact that I think they've got you know, a really good partnership going with GitLab, and I think that they're supporting them to move to GitLab. So I think that's part of the reason why it's not going to be an expensive thing for the Drupal Association to do. So yeah, I think it's going to improve it.
We have time for one more.
Cool. All right. See you all at Sprint Day. Thanks. Wasn't too big.